videos? What about when people are just sitting down? Facebook, I mean YouTube. Oh, you're all the same. Oh, he said they're all the same. Ah, shut up. I'm not talking about the Asians. I'm sorry, YouTube gets on my nerves. Look at that. Let's just cut the top of my head off, shall we? Because if you what you really want to see is all this empty space on the sides, isn't it? It's the one thing I miss about YouTube, Facebook live stream. They're all the same. I don't care. I'm not drunk enough for this. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Another North Korean book after my other two. My other one's in I think in storage. I read this one second. First one was Escape from Camp 14. That was a story about a kid that was literally born in the work camps. So he escaped and was amazed by life in North Korea, and then even more amazed by life everywhere else. I mean, the guy had literally came from nothing. That was a dark one. That was so difficult to read, especially the part where his finger was just amputated by blunt force because he made a fist when they tried to pull his fingernails out, so they punished him by just taking one of his fingers, you know, yeah. That was horrible, because the amount of people who died from the famine was just brutal. Absolutely brutal. What you learn about that one is, what ended the 90s famine was the fact that so many people died. There was enough food to go around again. God, I look terrible with this light on top here, but I kind of need it to read, really. Sorry, you're going to have to deal with a pasty, ugly-looking Englishman for the 40-odd minutes. I'm sorry. But maybe we'll all learn something here. Before we start, I got some lovely new shoes. Look at that. Well, boots. They got that whole belt on the side type thing, but I really like these. It's raining outside. It's kind of miserable, but it could be worse. Let's take a trip into let's take our third trip into North Korea. First one for you guys, I guess. But you know what? I really want to see if I can get a camera on this. I really want to share this kind of story with you because you would not believe the head's been cut off. Lovely. You think they give you the opportunity to do sound checks and everything with this, wouldn't you, being YouTube? But you know, they're too busy just trying to delete everyone remotely right wing. Fortunately, I'm under the radar. Because I'm just not very popular, which is good. Because popularity, populist means power. And power means Nazism these days, so... if I stay under the radar, I'm fine. I won't also get thrown with every epithet under the book. Let's put some music on in the background if we can. Now this book, screw it, let's read the back, shall we? I've already read a chapter, but I'm going to read it again for you guys, because I want to start this from the beginning and work our way through until we get to the end. I tell you, man, I feel like the Yalu River is something I know quite intimately myself now after these books. That's the river that separates China and North Korea. It must be crossed to get into China. Music isn't too loud, so we don't get DCMA strike. That's too loud. Let's turn it down before we get blocked. There we go, that's better. Hopefully the rain's drowning that out as well. On the cold black night of 31st of March 2007. Oh, that's not long after my birthday. My birthday is on the 6th of March, which is tomorrow. Thank you. My mother and I scrambled down the deep, steep, rocky bank of the frozen Yalu River that divides North Korea and China. There are patrols above us and below. This is the story of 13-year-old fuck, this is gonna be fun. Yeonmi Park, who risked her life when she and her family fled North Korea, revealing what it is like to live under a brutally repressive regime, glorious socialist, which starved and terrorized its people. Yeonmi tells of her family's courageous decision to escape and of the extraordinary, heartbreaking journey that followed, culminating in a daring nighttime trek across the Gobi Desert. Shit the bed. Let's look at the map, shall we? I had no idea the Gobi Desert was so close. So here's your South Korea, here's your North Korea. Here's China. Tiny section of it is attached to Russia. Up here you got Mongolia. And right here's the Gobi Desert. Which I mix up the Sahara, so I thought it was in Africa. I had no idea that a desert actually. Well, it's not. Jesus Christ, the route she must have taken, man. Dear God. I'm just wearing my suit so I don't look like a peasant while I'm talking to you guys. The prologue. On the cold black night of March 31st, 2007, my mother and I scrambled down the steep rocky bank of the frozen Yalu River that divides North Korea and China. There were patrols above us and below, and guard posts 100 yards on either side of us manned by soldiers ready to shoot anyone attempting to cross the border. We had no idea what would come next, but we were desperate to get to China, where there might be a chance to survive. I was 13 years old and weighed only 60 pounds. Just a week earlier, I'd been in hospital in my hometown of Hyesan, along the Chinese border, suffering from severe intestinal infection that the doctors had mistakenly diagnosed as appendicitis. I was still in terrible pain from the incision. I was so weak I could barely walk. The young North Korean smuggler who was guiding us across the border insisted we had to go that night. He had paid some guards to look the other way, but he couldn't bribe all the soldiers in the area, so we had to be extremely cautious. I followed him in the darkness, but I was so unsteady that I had to scoot down the bank on my bottom, sending small avalanches of rocks crashing ahead of me. He turned and whispered angrily for me to stop making so much noise, but it was too late. We could see the silhouette of a North Korean soldier climbing up from the roadbed. If this was one of the bribed border guards, he didn't seem to recognize us. "Go back," the Schultz soldier shouted. "Get out of here." You go now!" Sorry. Our guide scrambled down to meet him and we could hear them talking in hushed voices. Our guide returned alone. "Let's go," he said. "Hurry." I won't. It was early spring, the weather was getting warmer, melting patches of the frozen river. The place where we crossed was steep and narrow, protected from the sun during the day, or so it was still solid enough to hold our weight, we hoped. Our guide made a cell phone to someone on the other side, the Chinese side, and then whispered, "Run." The guide started running, but my feet would not move and I clung to my mother. I was so scared I was completely paralysed. The guide ran back for us, grabbed my hands and dragged me across the ice. When we reached solid ground, we started running and didn't stop until we were out of sight of the border guards. The riverbank was dark, but the lights of Shanghai, China, glowed just ahead of us. I turned to take a quick glance back at the place where I was born. The electric power grid was down, as usual, and all I could see was a black, lifeless horizon. I felt my heart pounding and out of my chest as we arrived at a small shack on the edge of some flat, vacant fields. I wasn't dreaming of freedom when I escaped North Korea. I didn't even know what it meant to be free. All I knew was that if my family stayed behind, we would probably die from starvation, from disease, from the inhuman conditions of a prison labour camp. The hunger had become unbearable. I was willing to risk my life for the promise of a bowl of rice. There was no more to our journey than our own survival. My mother and I were searching for my older sister, Eunmi, who had left for China a few days earlier and had not been heard from since. We hoped that she would be there waiting for us when we crossed the river. Instead, the only person who greeted us was a bald, middle-aged Chinese man, an ethnic North Korean like many of the people living in this border area. The man said something to my mother and then led her around the side of a building. From where I waited, I could hear my mother's pleading, "Anyo, Anyo, no, no." I knew then that something was terribly wrong. We had come to a bad place, maybe even worse than the one we had left. Oh God, I'm sick of So you can have my face cut off when we're trying to talk to you. There we go. See if we can get rid of some of that horrible glare, shall we? Should make it easier to read as well. And the answer to that is no. What a surprise. Okay. Well, that's alright. You're not watching this for my face. I am most grateful for two things. That I was born in North Korea and that I escaped from North Korea. Both of these events shaped me, and I would not trade them for an ordinary and peaceful life. But there is more to the story of how I became who I am today. Like tens of thousands of older North Koreans, I escaped my homeland and settled in South Korea, where we are still considered citizens. If a sealed border and nearly 70 years of conflict and tension never divided us. North and South Koreans have the same ethnic backgrounds and we speak the same language. Except in the North there are no words for things like shopping malls, liberty, or even love. At least as the rest of the world knows it. The only true love we can experience is worship for the Kims, a dynasty of dictators who have ruled North Korea for 3 generations. The regime blocks all outside information, all videos and movies, and jams radio signals. There is no World Wide Web and no Wikipedia. The only books are filled with propaganda telling us that we live in the greatest country in the world. Even though at least half of North Koreans live in extreme poverty, and many are chronically malnourished, my former country doesn't even call itself North Korea. It claims to be Chosun, the true Korea. A perfect socialist paradise where 25 million people live only to serve the supreme leader, Kim Jong-un. Many of us who have escaped call ourselves defectors, because by refusing to accept our fate to die for the leader, we have deserted our duty. The regime calls us traitors. If I tried to return, I would be executed. The information blockade works both ways. Excuse me. Not only does the government attempt to keep all foreign media from reaching its people, it also prevents outsiders from learning the truth about North Korea. The regime is known as the Hermit Kingdom because it tries to make itself unknowable. Only those of us who have escaped can describe what really goes on behind those sealed borders. But until recently, our stories were seldom heard. I arrived in South Korea in the spring of 2009. A 15-year-old with no money and the equivalent of 2 years of primary school. 5 years later, I was a sophomore at a top university in Seoul. A police administration major with a growing awareness of the burning need for justice in the land where I was born. I have told the story of my escape from North Korea many times, in many forums. I've described how human traffickers tricked my mother and me into following them into China, where my mother protected me and sacrificed herself to be raped by the broker who had targeted me. Once in China, we continued to look for my sister, without success. My father crossed the border, my lord. My father crossed the border in order to join our search, but he died of untreated cancer a few months later. Jesus. In 2009, my mother and I were rescued by Christian missionaries, who led us to the Mongolian border with China. From there, we walked through the frigid Gobi Desert one endless winter night, following the stars to freedom. All of this is true, but it is not the whole story. Before now, My mother only knew what really happened in the 2 years that passed between the night we crossed the Yalu River into China and the day we arrived in South Korea to begin a new life. I was told almost nothing of my story to the other defectors and human rights advocates I've met in South Korea. I believe that somehow, if I refused to acknowledge the unspeakable past, it would just disappear. I convinced myself that a lot of it never happened. I taught myself to forget the rest. But, as I begin to write this book, I realized that without the whole truth, my life would have no power, no real meaning. With the help of my mother, the memories of our lives in North Korea and China came back to me like scenes from a forgotten nightmare. Some of the images appeared with a terrible clarity. Others were hazy or scrambled like a deck of cards spilled upon a floor. The process of writing has been the process of remembering and trying to make sense out of those memories. Along with writing, reading has helped me order my world. As soon as I arrived in South Korea and could get my hands on translations of the world's great books, I began devouring them. Later I was able to read them in English, and as I began to write my own book, I came across a famous line by Joan Didion. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. Even though the writer and I come from such different cultures, I feel the truth of those words echoing inside me. I understand that sometimes the only way we can survive our own memories is to shape them into a story that makes sense out of events that seem inexplicable. Along my journey, I have seen the horrors that humans can inflict on one another. But I have also witnessed acts of tenderness and kindness and sacrifice in the worst imaginable circumstances. I know that it is possible to lose part of your humanity in order to survive. But I also know that the spark of human dignity is never completely extinguished, and that given the oxygen of freedom and the power of love, it can grow again. This is the story of the choices that I made in order to live. Part 1. North Korea. One. Even the birds and mice can hear you whisper. The Yalu River winds like the tail of a dragon between China and North Korea on its way to the Yellow Sea. At Hyesan, it opens into a valley in the Paektu Mountains, where the city of 200,000 sprawls between the rolling hills and a high plateau covered with fields, patches of trees, grass, and graves. The river, usually shallow and tame, is frozen solid during the winter, which lasts the better part of the year. This is the coldest part of North Korea. With temperatures sometimes plunging into the minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, only the toughest survive. To me, Hyesan was my home. Just across the river is the Chinese city of Changbai, which has a large population of ethnic Koreans. Families on both sides of the border have been trading with one another for generations. As a child, I would often stand in the darkness and stare across the river at the lights of Changbai, wondering what was going on beyond my city's limits. It was exciting to watch the colourful fireworks explode in the velvet black sky during festivals and Chinese New Year. We never had such things on our side of the border. Sometimes, when I walked down to the river to fill my buckets with water and the damp wind was blowing just right, I could actually smell delicious food. Oily noodles and dumplings cooked in the kitchens on the other side. The same wind carried the voices of the Chinese children who were playing on the opposite bank. "Hey you! Are you hungry over there?" the boy shouted in Korean. "No, shut up, you fat Chinese," I shouted back. This wasn't true. In fact, I was very hungry. But there was no use in talking about it. I came into this world too soon. My mother was only 7 months pregnant when she went into labour. When I was born on October the 4th, 1993. That makes her, 9 years younger than me, I think. I weighed less than 3 pounds. The doctor in the I was about 6. The doctor in the hospital in Hye-san told my mother I was so small there was nothing they could do for me. Quote, "She might live or she might die," he said. "We don't know." In the end, it was up to me to live. No matter how many blankets my mother wrapped around me, she couldn't keep me warm. So she heated up a stone and put it in the blanket with me. And that's how I survived. A few days later, my parents brought me home and waited. My sister Eunmi, Eunmi. My sister Eunmi had been, it's probably not how you pronounce it, had been born 2 years earlier. And this time my father, Park Jin-sik, was hoping for a son in patriarchal North Korea. Pay attention to that line, children. I mean, ladies and gentlemen. What am I, 80? Jesus. Okay, this is a patriarchy. Oh my god, on a side note, this is glorious and I would highly recommend it. It's expensive, but it's completely unflavoured, uncoloured, 5 years aged rum from Barbados. It's so ridiculously sweet. So much sugar cane over there from the years, the centuries and centuries of sugarcane farming. Anything you grow in Barbados or St. Lucia, probably still parts of Jamaica, it's just loaded with sugar. It's rich in the ground. It is glorious. That light is getting on my nerves. I wouldn't be able to see shit without it, I assure you. Oh yeah, no, that's horrible. I will end up even more blind. Now my glasses need light to read. A little more than candlelight. Okay, where are we? In patriarchal North Korea, it was the male line that really mattered. However, he quickly recovered from his disappointment. Most of the time it's the mother who makes the strongest bond with a baby, but my father was the one who could soothe me when I was crying. It was my father's arms that I felt protected and cherished. Both my mother and my father encouraged me from the start to be proud of who I am. When I was very young, we lived in a one-storey house perched on a hill above the railroad tracks that curved like a rusty spine throughout the city. Our house was small and drafty, and because we shared a wall with a neighbour, we could always hear what was going on next door. North Korean walls tended to be very thin. Not just so you could hear defectors and people talking, but because of the sheer poverty of the country. They certainly didn't have insulation. Our house was small and drafty, and because we shared a wall with a neighbour, we could always hear what was going on next door. We could also hear mice squeaking and skittering around in the ceiling at night, but it was paradise to me, because we were there as a family. My first memories are of the dark and the cold. During the winter months, my first memory is running away from my auntie because I only liked letting my mum pick me up. I couldn't walk. I have a memory of crawling away as fast as I can. Funny your knees didn't hurt crawling as a baby. Probably because it's mostly fat, no bone. or because like instead of 2 4 leg bones you've got like 7 in there bouncing around. They don't fuse together until you get older. Anyway, carrying on. During the winter months, the most popular place in our house was a small fireplace that burned wood or coal or whatever we could find. We cooked on top of the fire, and there were channels running under the cement floor to carry the smoke to a wooden chimney on the other side of the house. This traditional heating system was supposed to keep the room warm, but it was no match for the icy nights. At the end of the day, my mother would spread a thick blanket out next to the fire, and we would all climb under the covers. First my mother, then me, then my sister, and my father at the end in the coldest spot. Because, you know, it's always the dad that, dad has the cold spot. He stays on the ship when it's sinking, and, what's the other one? He's the last one to get the bath water, as well. And of course that was kind of practical, because you don't want the guy covered in fucking coal fucking powder from head to toe, which was most of the English. In the early 1900s and most of the 1800s. Most of the 1700s. And then before that we were all farmers getting whipped by the fucking monarchy. Anyway, moving on. My father on the end in the coldest spot. Once the sun went down, you couldn't see anything at all. In our part of North Korea, it was normal to go for weeks and even months without any electricity. Candles were very expensive, so we played games in the dark, sometimes under the covers so we could tease each other. "Whose foot is this?" my mother would say, poking with her toe. It's mine, Naomi would cry. On winter evenings and mornings, even in summertime, everywhere we looked, we could see smoke coming from the chimneys of Hyesan. Our neighbourhood was very cosy and small, and we knew everyone who lived there. Oh, sorry, give me a few seconds. For those who are watching this after it's played, skip about 15 seconds, I'll be reading again. Right, that's about 15 seconds. Alright, welcome back. The unpaved lanes between houses were too narrow for cars. Although this wasn't much of a problem, there were so few cars. People in our neighbourhood got around on foot, and for the few who could afford one, on a bicycle or a motorcycle. The paths would turn slippery with mud after rain, but that was the best time for the neighbourhood kids to play our favourite chasing game. But I was smaller and slower than the other children my age. I always had a hard time fitting in and keeping up. When I started school, Eunmi, my big sister, sometimes had to fight the older kids to defend me. She wasn't very big either, but she was smart and she was fast. She was my protector and playmate. When it snowed, she carried me up the hills around our neighbourhood. She put me in her lap and wrapped her arms around me. I held on tight as we slid back down on our bottoms, screaming and laughing. I was just happy to be part of her world. In the summer, all the kids went down to play in the Yalu River, but I never learned how to swim. A lot of North Koreans can't. I just sat on the bank while the others paddled out into the current. Sometimes my sister or my best friend Young Ja would see me by myself and bring me some pretty rocks they'd found in the deep river. And sometimes they held me in their arms and carried me a little way into the water before bringing me back to shore. Youngja and I were the same age. We lived in the same part of town. I liked her, because we were both good at using our imaginations to create our own toys. You could find a few manufactured dolls and other toys in the market, but they were usually too expensive. Instead, we made little bowls and animals out of mud, and sometimes even miniature tanks. Homemade military toys were very big in North Korea. But we girls were obsessed with paper dolls, and we spent hours cutting them out of thick paper making dresses and scarves for them out of scraps. Sometimes my mother made pinwheels for us, and we would fasten them onto the metal footbridge above the railroad we called the Cloud Bridge. Years later, when life was much harder and more complicated, I would pass by that bridge and think how happy it made us to watch those pinwheels spin in the open breeze. When I was young, I didn't hear the background noise of mechanical sounds like I do now in South Korea and the United States. There weren't garbage trucks churning, horns honking, phones ringing everywhere. All I could hear were the sounds people were making. Women washing dishes, mothers calling their children, the clink of spoons and chopsticks on rice bowls as families sat down to eat. Sometimes I could hear my friends being scolded by their parents. There was no music blaring in the background, no eyes glued to smartphones back then, but there was human intimacy and connection. Something that is hard to find in the modern world I inhabit today. I feel you, sister. At our house in Hyesan, our water pipes were almost always dry. So my mother usually carried our clothes down to the river and washed them there. When she brought them back, she'd put them on the warm floor to dry. Because electricity was so rare in our neighbourhood, whenever the lights came on, people were so happy they would sing and clap and shout. Even in the middle of the night, we would wake up to celebrate. When you have so little, just the smallest thing can make you happy. And that is one of the very few features of life in North Korea that I actually miss. Of course, the lights would never stay on for long. When they flickered off, we just said, "Oh well," and went back to sleep. Even when the electricity came on, the power was very low. So many families had a voltage booster to help run the appliances. These machines were always catching on fire. And one March night it happened at our house when my parents were out. I was just a baby. All I remember is waking up and crying while someone carried me through the smoke and flames. I don't know if it was my sister or neighbour who saved me. My mother came running when someone told her about the blaze, but my sister and I were... Oh, excuse me. But my sister and I were both already safe in our neighbour's house. Our home was destroyed by fire. But right away, my father rebuilt it with his own hands. Oh my fucking god. Shit the bed. Oh well, the house has been destroyed. Son, get my screwdriver. It's gonna be a long night. Jesus fucking Christ, man. North Koreans. Jesus. I'm sorry, but that's not a line you just read and move on with. Jesus. Okay. After that, we planted a garden in our small fenced yard. My mother and sister weren't interested in gardening, but my father and I loved it. We put squash and cabbage and cucumbers and sunflowers. My father also planted beautiful fuchsia flowers called eardrops along the fence. I adored draping the long, delicate blossoms from my ears and pretending they were earrings. My mother asked my father why he was wasting valuable space planting flowers, but he ignored her. In North Korea, people, I can understand why she asked that. You know, you've got space to grow more food, you grow food, especially in a food-deprived area like North Korea. It's a lot, his mum's being sensible. I guess you've realised that in those terrible times you need a little bit of meaning to brighten up a horrible existence. But it's not like I don't understand where she's coming from, man. That's extra cabbage space right there. I mean, jeez. In North Korea, people lived close to nature, and they developed skills to predict the next day's weather. We didn't have the internet, and we usually couldn't watch the government's broadcast on television because of the electricity shortage, so we had to figure it out ourselves. During the long summer nights, our neighbourhood would all sit around outside their houses in the evening air. There were no chairs. We just sat on the ground looking at the sky. If we saw millions of stars up there, someone would remark, "Tomorrow will be a sunny day," and we'd all murmur agreement. If there were only thousands of stars, someone might say, "Looks like tomorrow will be cloudy," and that was our local forecast. The best day of every month was Noodle Day, when my mother bought fresh, moist noodles that were made in a machine in town. We wanted them to last a long time, so we spread them out on the warm kitchen floor to dry. It was like a holiday for my sister and me, because we would get to sneak a few noodles and eat them while they were still soft and sweet. In the earliest years of my life, before the worst of that famine that struck North Korea in the mid-1990s, grips are sitting. Our friends would come around and we would share the noodles with them. In North Korea, you are supposed to share everything. But later, when times were much harder for our family and for the country, my mother told us to chase the children away. We couldn't afford to share anything. I swear to God, every book I read about North Korea, the only reason anyone survives to write these books is because they had to show a level of selfishness during a famine and keep themselves alive. And that's a horrible thing to think of, but if you were to... The most... That's what I learned in the second book, Nothing to Envy, which we were looking at here. I've lost my train of thought, give me a second, but in this one, her dad, I think, was the first one to die because he would not steal. He would not steal food. Her mum told her daughters to go out and steal food, and they would do what they could. Excuse me, and their brothers. Excuse me again, I'm sorry. Yeah, the ones who were most dedicated to the cause and would not steal because they felt they were, betraying everything that they had believed in. They were the first ones to starve to death, which is really sad. So the ones who survived in North Korea were the ones that were willing to throw away the socialist system, engage in markets, which allowed them to sell the things they'd grown in their gardens and then buy and buy other food, so that they could keep their family alive. And these are the stories you read about. It's always the ones that were somewhat selfish when it came to food, not anything else. These families that held on to their own food, obviously, after attaining it by working, because the thing is, the state wasn't exactly paying the men, so the women, but they started to work. So the women would go out and sell the food from their garden, and then they'd be able to buy a bit of meat or something to go with the food they hadn't sold, obviously, because you'd all love some of the you grow vegetables, and then you try and buy some protein to go with it. And Persona 3. I'll explain why I don't know this. So. And switch to something else, actually. We're probably lucky these guys don't have anything to do with Sony, which is probably why we haven't DCMA'd yet while we're live streaming, but bum 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 bum. Let's go for some Disney, Sean. Keep that in the background. So I'm making myself another cigarette, and then we will be back on with the rest of the book. So yeah, the men were still during the famine. Wages just got less and less and less and less as the Stalinists collapsed and couldn't afford to fund North Korea anymore. North Korea, Kim Il-sung was very good at playing the two communist states off of each other. He would tell the Chinese how generous the Russians were being, and he would tell the Russians how generous the Chinese were being as communists. So although the Maoists are better than the Stalinists, and so the Stalinists would give North Korea more food, and they'd be, "Oh, aren't the Stalinists lovely?" And the Maoists from China would be, "Oh, fuck that, we're the better communists." He was very good at playing them off each other, so they'd just send him everything, Of course, China was the one that helped during the Korean War. Because North Korea got fucked, and then, 80,000 Chinese troops? It was more than that, wasn't it? I think that was just how many, My granddad killed so many Chinese people when he was in Korea, because he was stuck on that hill, Hill 232, they call it Gloucester Hill now. Obviously the North Koreans don't call it that, or the South Koreans. But it was Hill 232, strategic point. where we got screwed over because a tank got destroyed in the only road that could have reinforced the people. So they were stuck and they held up on the hill for a day and a half until they ran out of ammunition. They just kept reloading the machine guns and just firing them into the Chinese that were advancing up the hill. And I don't know how many people my granddad fucking shot. I mean, you know, he could have fucking what? He could have wiped out like 8,000 Chinese people for all I know. He killed fucking thousands of people just trying to stay alive. They were stuck up there, man. They had nothing. Typical British fashion. Like, you're right. Do you need reinforcements? And what do we say? Colonel Carn, who my granddad used to drive around. He was his driver. Oh, things are a little sticky up here. It's just, oh, okay, so you're alright, you know, we'll leave you for a bit, you fuck, man. Typical British people. It's like, well, you know, your leg's broken. I've kind of hurt my leg. Like, could you send an ambulance? What do you mean you've hurt it? So you bashed on something? Well, I did bash it on something, yeah, you'll be fine. Click. It's fucking bones sticking out. Oh, well, let's have a cup of tea. Fuck. Oh, you are? Pour some fucking tea on the bone. Get it right in there. That'll heal it up. Jesus Christ. Glorious testament of the English. We always play down our bloody problems. Yeah, the entire Battle of Britain. Yeah, I know. In your American and your foreign history books, it's considered a great event. But as far as the English are concerned, that just went down in our book as a day where we had bad weather. Yeah. Yeah, all them planes blocked out the sky, you know, and we couldn't read our newspapers. And our tea got cold quicker. The Daily Mail. Well, it was a bit sticky that day, but don't worry, the sun came out later. After we shot fuck knows how many Germans out of the sky, but... It's like, oh well, now we can go home. Wonderful port. Oh, yes, very good, yes. What year is that port? 36? Wonderful year. Fantastic. Absolutely glorious. Oh, Lord, what's happened? I'm afraid I seem to have spontaneously combusted. Oh, well, I am sorry. Yes, it's quite a problem. I've grown quite fond of living. Oh, dear. Well, we better do something. Oh, God, is it raining again? Jesus Christ. Oh, this country, I swear. Always with the rain. Always with the rain. Yeah, Lord. This is why we built boats. I mean ships. Sorry, not boats. That was the Germans. This was the charter of the land. Okay, enough about England. Let's see if I can figure out where we are. Oh yeah, the weather. Okay, and then Noodle Day. We couldn't afford to share anything. During the good times, a family meal would consist of rice, kimchi, which is cabbage and something, some kind of beans, and seaweed soup. But those things were too expensive to eat during the lean times. So you have to understand, seaweed, which you can get from the sea, was too expensive. I mean, it was that difficult. Sometimes we would skip meals. The North Koreans had a slogan. The Workers' Party had a slogan in the 90s. Let's eat 2 meals a day. Fuck, man. Seriously. Often all we had to eat was a thin porridge of wheat or barley, beans, or black frozen potatoes from the ground made to cakes filled with cabbage. It's just, you know, it's not very nutritious, but you just needed something to put in your goddamn body, man. You couldn't understand it. It's just, our food is so calorie rich, man. It's just, Jesus. You know, these people are eating tree bark. And in America and England, you can put your pets on a diet from being too fat. Now, I just imagine you take one of our fat cats or your fat dog that you've overfed, right? And I pick that thing up and I instant transmission like Goku over to North Korea and drop that cat in a crowd of people. It'll be like finding treasure. Oh my god, they probably, I don't even know if they'll cook it, just that fear of too many people wanting to steal it. They'll all beat each other up and then just start eating it raw, just tearing at it. Because it'll have so much meat on it, so much fat, it will keep them going for ages. And they will devour that thing alive, I can assure you. You just, in the mid-90s, Jesus Christ. All of our fat, domesticated animals would, oh wow. You know, you wouldn't even care if it belonged to somebody. You just eat it. Reminds me of a story from Vietnam, actually. We wouldn't go into that right now. Okay. Sorry, I'm taking my time here now, aren't I? The country I grew up in was not like the one my parents had known as children in the 60s and 70s. When they were young, the state took care of everyone's basic needs. Yeah, they had a lot of money when China and they were better than South Korea in the first 20 years of the communist North. When they were young, the state took care of everyone. Clothes, medical care, food. After the Cold War ended, 1950, 64? 84? 89? 90, 91? 91. Sorry, I know I'm fucking about here. The Cuban Missile Crisis, Second Missile Crisis, 84. Stalin dying. Thank fuck. Prick was still alive when I was born. And that Berlin Wall was still up as well. The only wall I didn't like. That's because I knew why it was put up. And it wasn't to stop people from getting raped. Anyway, so yeah. 91 collapsed, yeah. When they were young, after the Cold War ended, the communist countries that had been propping up North Korean regime, China, Russia, all but abandoned it, and our state-controlled economy collapsed. North Koreans were suddenly on their own. I was too young to realise how desperate... I was too young in the 90s to realise too how desperate things were becoming in the grown-up world. As my family tried to adapt to the massive changes in North Korea in the 90s, after my sister and I were asleep, my parents would sometimes lie awake, sick with worry, wondering what they would do to keep us all from starving to death. You and every other North Korean family out there, man. Oh fuck, what have we done with my life here? Do you remember I was funny about that? Anything I did over here, I learned very quickly not to repeat. I was taught never to express my opinion, never to question anything. I was taught to simply follow what the government told me to do or say or think. I actually believed that our dear leader, Kim Jong-il, could read my mind, and I would be punished for bad thoughts. And if he didn't hear me, spies were everywhere, listening at the windows and watching at the schoolyard. We all belonged to Iminbang, or Neighborhood People's Units. We were ordered to inform on anyone who said the wrong thing. We lived in fear. And almost everyone, my mother included, had a personal experience that demonstrated the dangers of talking, thinking. I was only 9 months old when Kim Il-sung died on July 8th, 1994. North Koreans worship the 82-year-old. Great leader. At the time of his death, Kim Il-sung had ruled North Korea with an iron grip for almost 5 decades. True believers, my mother included, thought that Kim Il-sung was actually immortal. His passing was a time of passionate mourning, and also uncertainty in the country. The great leader's son, Kim Jong-il, had already been chosen to succeed his father, but the huge void Kim Il-sung left behind had everyone on edge. My mother strapped me on her back to join the thousands of mourners who daily flocked to the plaza-like Kim Il-sung monument in Hyesan to weep and wail for the fallen leader during the official mourning period. The mourners left offerings of flowers and cups of rice liquor to show their adoration and grief. During that time, one of my mother's relatives was visiting from northeast China, where many ethnic North Koreans lived. Because he was a foreigner, he was not as reverent about the great leader. And when my mother came back from one of her trips to the monument, Uncle Yong-soo repeated a story he had just heard. The Pyongyang, that's the capital city of North Korea, the Pyongyang government had announced Kim Il-sung had died of a heart attack, but Yong-soo reported that a Chinese friend had told him he had heard from a North Korean police officer that this wasn't true. The real cause of death, he said, was Hwabyung, a common diagnosis of both North and South Korea that roughly translates into disease caused by mental or emotional stress. Yong-soo had heard that there were disagreements between Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il over the elder Kim's plans to hold talks with South Korea. Oh. Stop, my mother said. Don't say another word. She was so upset that Yong-soo would dare to spread rumours about the regime that she had to be rude to her guests to shut him up. The next day, she and her best friends were visited. My God, I wonder if Sung was ever. Well, of course, after the state collapsed, he was alive for 3 years of what the fuck do we do about the country. His son took the flak, obviously. He was lucky to die when he did, because he got all the credit for the fact that he was being propped up by other cities, by the socialist states. He was probably thinking about reunifying the country to get food. But Kim Jong-il, of course, had been raised as a communist. And when you are raised in that belief, but you don't have this background belief of I know it's bullshit and I need funds, of course, that's where all this Juche bullshit came from, and the famine. And so this is what happens when you raise people to be communists. More communists than the generation before. They'll shoot you in the back of the head. And everyone dies from starvation. It doesn't matter how amazing you think it's going to be. There is nothing but death that comes from collectivization of food. Where are we? The next day, she and her best friend were visiting the monument to place more flowers when they noticed someone had vandalized the offerings. Oh, there are such bad people in this world, her friend said. You are so right, my mother said. You wouldn't believe the evil rumour that our enemies have been spreading. And then she told her friends about the lies she had heard. Oh, God. The following day, she was walking across the Cloud Bridge. Those pinwheels. When she noticed an official-looking car parked in the lane below her house, and a large group of men gathered around it. She immediately knew something bad was about to happen. Oh, something awful was about to happen. The visitors were plainclothes agents of the dreaded Bowibu, or National Security Agency, that ran the political prison camps and investigated threats to the regime. Everybody knew these men could take you away and you would never be heard from again. Worse, these weren't locals. These had been sent from headquarters. A senior agent met my mother at our door and led her to our neighbour's house, which she had borrowed for the afternoon. They both sat, and he looked at her with eyes like black glass. Do you know why I'm here? He asked. Yes, I do, she said. So where did you hear that? He said. She told him she heard the rumour from her husband's Chinese uncle, but had heard it from a friend. What do you think of it? He said. It's a terrible, terrible, evil rumour, she said most sincerely. It's a lie told by our enemies, who are trying to destroy the greatest nation in the world. Well, what do you think you have done wrong? He said flatly. Sir, I should have reported it and gone to the party organisation to report. I was wrong to just tell it to an individual. No, you are wrong, he said. You should never have let those words out of your mouth. Now she was sure that she was going to die. She kept telling him she was sorry, begging to spare her life for the sake of her 2 babies. As we say in Korea, she begged until she thought her hands would wear off. Finally, he said in a sharp voice that chilled her bones, "You must never mention this again. Not to your friends, or your husband, or your children. Do you understand what will happen if you do?" She did. Completely. Next, he interrogated Uncle Yong-soo, who was nervously waiting with the family at our house. My mother thinks that she was spared any punishment because Yong-soo confirmed to the agent how angry she had been when he told her the rumour. When it was over, the agents rode away in their car. My uncle went back to China. When my father asked my mother what the secret police wanted from her, she said it was nothing she could talk about and never mentioned it again. My father went to his grave without knowing how close they had come to disaster. Many years later, after she told me her story, I finally understood why when my mother sent me off to school, she never said, "Have a good day," or even "Watch out for strangers." What she always said was, "Take care of your mouth." In most countries, a mother encourages her children to ask about everything, but not in North Korea. As soon as I was old enough to understand, my mother warned me that I should be careful about what I was saying. "Remember, Yeon-mi-ya," she said gently. "Even when you think you're alone, the birds and mice can hear you whisper." She didn't mean to scare me, but I felt a deep darkness and horror inside me. Chapter 2. A dangerous history. I think we'll leave it there, because we passed the hour. Well, we haven't passed the hour mark, but we're at 57 minutes, so we're close enough. Alright, this was cool. We'll do chapter 2. If not tomorrow, then the next time. I don't know how to pause this. So, take care. I'm going to shut it down now. I'll see you for chapter 2.